Hello, everybody. This is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome, and welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you're watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. Well, I'm very excited that Andy and I are back today because it has been some time since Andy has shown up on the channel, and along with pretty much everybody else, myself included. So it's really good to be back. So, Andy, it's great to see you, and I'm really hoping that you're excited for tonight's video.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for it. And after a little bit of a break, being back for this video in particular is incredibly exciting. I'm really
Yeah.
looking forward to this one.
Yeah, because we're finally getting back to at least one of our segments of Ultimate Journey. We're going back on to the DC and Marvel one that the original one, as a matter of fact, when Ultimate Journey was actually conceived, and that is The Roads to Blackest Night and 2015 Secret War. And we are officially back on the road to Blackest Night. And we've reached the point in our journey to Blackest Night where it's basically all Green Lantern all the time, most of the time. So I'm really excited to be where we are right now because this is where everything is really gonna start like hitting you like a freight train at a mile per minute. And we're gonna basically also be getting to the point in our journey where a certain single creator is pretty much driving the bus to the road to Blackest Night, down the road to Blackest Night at this point. And that, of course, is Geoff Johns. So before we get into the comics that we're going to be talking about today, just want to give everybody a little bit of a background because it's been a little bit of time. I think it's more important, as they always say, we don't know where we're going until we know where we've been, and also a little bit of an understanding of Geoff Johns and where he was up until this point. So it is crazy to believe that the books that we're discussing came out. The story begins at the very end of 2004. The following year would mark the 20th anniversary of Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is a pretty cool thing considering that is where we started. And we're talking about an up and coming writer over at DC Comics who pretty much came into his own right here with the comic that we're going to be discussing, and that is Green Lantern Rebirth, followed by the first story arc of Geoff Johns' legendary and iconic Green Lantern run. So we did discuss Geoff Johns before in a part of our Ultimate Journey from 1999's Day of Judgment. He was not a known writer at the time, but little by little over the next couple of years, he would start to really come into his own. And one of his biggest claims to fame, even though it's not part of our Ultimate Journey, but I would recommend anybody to read this, please do yourself a favor and check out Geoff Johns' JSA run because it is without a doubt one of the greatest comic book runs I've ever read. And it really was a beautiful love letter to the golden age of superheroes. And Geoff Johns did a phenomenal job on that. Andy, I know you've also read a little bit of that, so I'm sure you could agree with me when I say
Yeah.
that. But we're now just little by little, he starts getting attached to a lot of different titles at this very point in time. And Green Lantern seemed to be his calling in regards to things that he really wanted to write. And he gets his opportunity with Green Lantern Rebirth. And Green Lantern Rebirth begins with Kyle Rayner coming back from space. So if you don't know how he got to space, if you've been checking out our Ultimate Journey, our whole Ultimate Journey on the Green Lantern side began pretty much with Emerald Twilight and Hal Jordan basically going insane and destroying the Green Lantern Corps, only to be found that only one Green Lantern will remain, and it will be Kyle Rayner, created by Ron Mars. And Ron Mars would develop this single Green Lantern for a couple of years. And at the end of Ron Mars's Green Lantern run, along with a couple of other artists that helped him, we saw what happened within that, but it was mostly about Kyle Rayner finally realizing that he can truly be a great superhero. And he just ends his journey defeating the original nemesis that threw his whole world into flux, and he just wants to see what else is out there beyond Earth. And that's where his journey pretty much ends in the pages of the comics. And he comes crashing back down to Earth in fear because something is coming. So, Andy, I know that you read Green Lantern Rebirth before, but I really want to get your thoughts because I know you've been dying to talk about them. Now that you're reading this based on everything that we have done, I'm going to guess that this is a whole new world for you.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's important to emphasize that it really is a great comic that works on its own, and people don't have to do this whole thing we're doing of reading tons and tons of comics in the lead up to it. But this is a quintessential example of doing the homework is rewarding because it is a great story in a vacuum, but from like page one, we start seeing references to not just one, but basically every single book that we read in the lead up to this as to why it was important to read. And it's it's interesting. It could almost be hokey, the way that it's so referential, but it doesn't come across that way because Geoff Johns manages to tread that line of it's it's respectful. It's like we're gonna leverage everything you know about this character. If you're truly a Green Lantern fan, you're gonna feel right at home here. This is gonna be all gas, no brakes, Green Lantern lore, hot and heavy. And it was wonderful. And yes, so I had read Rebirth before and greatly enjoyed it and made me think, yeah, I would like to do some more Green Lantern reading at some point. But now, as opposed to a great introduction, it's also a highlight moment. I mean, it's a story I'll think of in the same tier as like Emerald Twilight when I think about emotional impact and what it does for the character and what it means going forward, because it's not just heavily referencing the past, it's weaving it all together to make a meaningful next chapter of how do you write a Green Lantern that's going to resonate with people? Well, it's pulling on everything that mattered, everything that people loved, and making it truly special and really mean something. I loved it.
Yeah,
Absolutely
and
loved it.
and something that I want the people watching to know is a little something that you said one time when we were chatting. Because of all of this stuff that we have been doing and how much Green Lantern we have been consuming, Green Lantern has been climbing up your personal rankings of your
Oh yeah.
favorite
Oh
superheroes at
yeah.
this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, definitely. Um, and like to the point where like I will really go to bat for Green Lantern now, having seen what can really be done with the character. And there's more for me to dive into, which is exciting. But you know, you can see how it could be a tricky character to write.
Yeah.
It's a weird space to inhabit in the DC universe. But when you pull on that emotional core and when you write really, really great stories that tie into the human part of what makes Hal tick, incredible.
Yeah, I think what it is about Green Lantern for me is not just the superpowers that he has. I just think that for me personally, because he really is my favorite superhero, I think it's just because of the intricate lore that's comes with this whole, because when you say Green Lantern, it really is an entire spectrum of characters and worlds and
Mhm.
stories.
Yeah.
Because I still remember, because Green Lantern was a character that I knew when I was a little kid, but when I saw things like Green Lantern showing up in Superman the animated series, that was when I first learned about the Green Lantern Corps. I did not know that Green Lantern was just one of many, that there's a whole
Mhm.
intergalactic police force, and that there are guardians that they listen to, and that their job is to keep the universe safe. And you don't get that if you just see Green Lantern for the first time as a child. So And then in Blackest Night in particular, when I was getting back into comics back in 2019, I always knew that Blackest Night and Geoff Johns, those were the things that I knew I wanted to see. And me consuming all of this knowledge that we're actually going through in chronological order, I did it completely out of order, because when I was reading Green Lantern Rebirth, I was basically reading pages and I'm just like saying, well, why has Kyle Rayner been in space this whole time? And how did Hal Jordan become the Spectre? So I basically started to find and do my research and find these little inklings. And it was just crazy how deep this rabbit hole went. And now that I kind of think that I may have officially read the complete story, just where we get to at this point in time with Green Lantern Rebirth, it's just incredible how you read the pages of these 6 issues and your memory just wafts over you, and you can't believe that, wow, like you said, Geoff Johns really did his homework. He really tied it all together, and it all just makes perfect sense.
Very true.
Yep. And I also have to give credit, even though he's not one of the most liked people in the world, we do have to give credit where credit is due to Ethan Van Sciver on some incredible artwork on Rebirth. And then in the first story arc of Green Lantern's title, we also get him and Carlos Pacquiao doing some truly incredible art that is just so gorgeous, so grand, and it really moves these stories fabulously. That's what I love so much. Everything just ties together wonderfully. The only thing that we really didn't touch upon, but it had happened, I believe, by the time we got to 0 Hour Crisis in Time, was that at this point, we know what has happened to Guy Gardner and what has happened to John Stewart with the Corps no longer being around. The fact that Guy Gardner is now a superhero called the Warrior, with an entity inside him which allows him to shape himself into weapons. And John Stewart, who at one point in time didn't have the use of his legs, was actually given the power to walk again, thanks to Hal Jordan, when he officially sacrificed himself into the sun to stop Earth from being destroyed in Final Night. And I told you when we read Final Night that it was not going to be one of the best parts of this journey, but the payoff is all going to make sense as we move forward. And Green Lantern Rebirth basically just shows you how important that part of our journey was.
Yeah. I know. I mean, and that's the thing. You're naming so many of the stories that we read, because it really, this is the part of the journey that starts and really takes off at supersonic speed, because it feels like everything we were reading is to inform what we're doing now. We call it the road to Blackest Night, but this is Geoff Johns taking the reins and doing Green Lantern, and this is what informed that story, that Blackest Night is the capstone too. But we're here, right? So we've already named everything. We've everything we have read so far in this discussion. And you can see why when you turn to these pages.
Yes, and when Kyle Rayner does crash back down to Earth, it pretty much starts a chain reaction with his warning. All of a sudden, crazy things start happening to Guy, and Hal starts to feel a little unstable via the Spectre, and the Spectre is basically doing very strange things because of what is happening. And one of the weird things that happens is a random encounter with a old villain of Green Lanterns called the Black Hand. And as the Spectre, Hal Jordan basically does play judge, jury, and executioner and slices off one of his hands. And he's witnessed. They're shocked that this is something that happened. And even people like his best friend Ollie, and of course even Batman has something to say about the behavior of the fact that what's been going on with Hal, even as the Spectre. Something is just not right in the world, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better right now, because it's gotten to the point where things that are revolving around the Green Lanterns, even though there are some good, even though there is good news to report via Kilowog, it's just we're in a really bad place right now, and we don't understand why until a little bit later on when we find out what is going on via one word. One of the few things that they do notice up in the watchtower, because that's where they get Guy Gardner to get some much needed life support, they're basically saying that what's inside him is basically rejecting him, and they just don't understand why. And again, everyone just seems very unsettled, especially because of the actions of Hal. And then all of a sudden, when they finally are able to find out what's going on, one name is mentioned, and that name is Parallax is coming. He's coming back. And when they think of Parallax, that's when everybody literally flips the hell out, because the last time the name Parallax was mentioned in their midst, it was Hal Jordan as Parallax, who had just done some serious damage to a lot of things around him and even outside Earth, all over the galaxy.
Something I really love about, and again, engaging with the stories that have already passed, right? I love Batman's skepticism in these stories. That really works for me. We talked about it at the time when we were first reading. I guess it would have been Zero Hour when all of that had started. The distrust for Hal, the openness of that, and I love that being a continued theme and him being slow to embrace anything about what is going on. Um, it really works for me, and it shows an attention to character and history beyond the Green Lantern story being written. It shows an attention to the DC universe, which our road to Blackest Night until we got to this point, while Green Lantern centric, is very much a history of the DC universe in many ways. And so it's great to see that, especially because when we get to the big event of Blackest Night, there is so much crossover and there are so many characters that are going to be relevant to that, that it's nice to see that both continuity and that intrigue from the character at this early point in him picking up the reins.
And I love Green Arrow's role in this whole story,
Yeah.
because I loved how he had an emergency power ring and battery that was given to him by Hal in case of an emergency. And of course, the running joke throughout the entire thing is the fact that he just cannot remember how the oath goes. That is actually one of my favorite parts of the whole story.
Yeah.
But I just when he encounters Hal again as the Spectre and he sees what's going on with him, he doesn't know what to do, because the last thing that he wants to do is what he did in Zero Hour Crisis in Time, which was kill him,
Kill
and he doesn't want to
him.
go down that road again. He has been scarred by his actions, even though he knew they were the right things to do, but he just doesn't want to do that again. But luckily he doesn't have to do it again, because little by little, when the closer Parallax gets, a lot of things start to fall into place. One of the things that does happen is just when we think that we're about to lose Guy Gardner, he gets his Green Lantern powers back, and you just see him full powered, smile on his face, and he's ready to go. And that's also a great moment, you know?
I love it. Was it John who said to him, like, I thought you said you didn't miss the ring. He's like, I lied.
And
It's
of
such a
course,
great,
John gets his ring back,
yeah,
and
yeah.
and Kyle will officially gain back his will and his
Hmm.
strength, and it will. And I want to talk about it a little bit later, but one of the few things that does happen with Kyle is one of my favorite parts. But I think the biggest surprise is what Parallax really is, and it's not what you would expect. It's a dragon made of yellow energy, because that was one of the few interesting things that I completely forgot about.
Mm.
One of the few things that is well known about the Green Lantern lore, especially in the Silver Age of comics, is that the weakness of the power rings of the Green Lantern Corps is the color yellow. That's no longer the case. And it hadn't been the case since Emerald Twilight. And we find out because it is Parallax had been a prisoner inside the power battery on Oa. when Parallax actually took over Hal Jordan's body, he left the power battery, and now the color yellow is no longer something that weakens the power of will. So I found that to be a very interesting thing, and it also makes sense. But there is also one big twist that happens right in the center of this story, and it's the return of Sinestro. And Hal looks at him as if he's seen a ghost. But the craziest thing is, he's not seeing a ghost because he thought that he killed Sinestro, but apparently he didn't. And that is where the whole story and everything that we personally have been reading comes to fruition. And you're like, wow, Geoff Johns even went down to the details of why Hal Jordan's hair went gray in the early 90s during like Reign of the Supermen. It was because of the fact that it wasn't just Parallax that was imprisoned in the battery. Sinestro was imprisoned in the battery as well.
Yeah, it
And
just
and
so
Sinestro
great.
manipulated Parallax.
So great. And it's funny. I remember so I had read Rebirth and I had read Blackest Night um years ago at this point, right? And so years predating us starting the journey. And I remember before doing one of our recordings, I forget which one, I was on like the DC fan wiki, just kind of like reading up a little synopsis of like a past story we had read, like trying to get everything fresh before we talked. And I was on Parallax, like and like it's like the highlighted word or whatever, and I remember this from months ago, and I started to think to myself, I was like, Parallax is way weirder later in this journey, isn't it? And I tried to remember, I'm like, oh yeah, it's like a yellow dragon thing later on. Like, hold on, what was all this about? And I was like, I'll read it again. It'll make sense when I get there. I just have to trust the process. Um, but in short, it works. And here's another example. We're talking about one of the past stories we read, Emerald Twilight, and it's great that Geoff Johns gives this sense of weight to the idea that Green Lanterns had a weakness to yellow, which is a campy, old comic kind of thing. But then he's like, all right, how do we give that weight? How do we have that mean something? How do we have our retcon of not having that matter anymore also mean something? It's brilliant. And it's fun in the way only comics can be, where it's campy. It's like this is a silly thing, but it's taken so seriously and so meaningfully and draws upon such a history of it that it makes you go, "Damn, that's cool," instead of "This is dumb." And it's cool. It's cool.
And
Brilliant.
in typical camp fashion of the supervillain, Sinestro's monologuing, the
Mhm.
story that he tells, it just blows your mind. He basically did this whole thing out of revenge because he was the greatest Green Lantern and because he basically got banished from the Corps because they hated the way that he used his powers and he hated the Guardians because he thought that they were just so soft and just doing everything according to him ass backward. He says, I'm gonna hurt you in the worst way possible, to the point where he manipulated Parallax to cause so many things that were just doom and gloom for Hal, whether it was the destruction, and it all culminated with the destruction of Coast City in Reign of the Supermen by Mongol and Cyborg. And just because
Mhm.
of that, this was his way to finally say, Parallax, your window is open. Now go embody this guy and let him raise hell for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Oh,
unbelievable.
I know. And the reason we're gushing, and I mean, we're just having fun talking to each other about this, but for everybody listening, this is really, it's the payoff, right? And this comics do this. This is why we're doing the journey. When you have this much background, you can gush over these I mean, I don't even want to call it a minor thing because obviously it's a big reveal, like Sinestro's return and all of that. But like, it really, like, we're talking about decades of comic lore coming, coming into like it mattering again. Just, oh man, so much fun. And it's one of those things too that like obviously you can tell that Geoff Johns loves Green Lantern based upon the encyclopedic knowledge he has of Green Lantern, that he's calling upon all of these things and rewriting them and reweaving them and recontextualizing them. So you can tell he loves it. But then the fact that he also makes it so much fun, in addition to just being like accurate and well read, that goes to show you everything about how much he loves the character. God damn.
Exactly. Exactly. And so, you know, through all of this, Hal Jordan's will does not break this time to the point where he is actually able to get the Green Lantern power back. When he gets the Green Lantern power back, all four of the human Green Lanterns are back in full form. The hair, the gray hair in Hal is gone, and the best, and also I gotta also admit, I love the design of Green Lantern in these comics. I
Yeah.
love like the glowing green circle, like levitating above the logo. It's just such a cool thing to look at in
Mhm.
the pages of a comic book, and I just love the fact that the Justice League is also there to help. And this officially comes to one of my favorite parts, and it's when he's about to say, "All right, it is time to just get going, and it's time to save the world." And Batman, of course, being as skeptical as he is, he's saying, I don't want, he shouldn't be doing this. I
Yeah.
don't trust him. And Hal punches
Yeah.
Batman out. And
Yeah.
I was like, you know something, Batman? You had it coming. You deserved that.
Yeah.
I completely forgot about that part. And when I read that one, I was like, oh God. I was like, no, it was just because of all the things that we were reading. I was like saying to myself, and I said it to Hal, I was like, thanks, Hal. I just needed Batman
Someone
to
had
shut
to
up for
do
a
it.
second.
Yeah, no, just a wonderful moment. And you know, the whole, well, I mean, the no fear. We'll talk about that, but the whole idea of like it just doesn't, the shtick doesn't work on Hal in the way in the way it works on everybody else. He's like, there's a job to do here. You
Yep.
gotta trust me. It's
Yep.
great.
And of course, my other favorite moment is when things calm down and Kyle finally sees Hal Jordan as Green Lantern in the flesh. Green Lantern actually stops everything. Hal stops everything and says, "Now let's do this right this time." He takes his hand out to Kyle and says, "Hal Jordan, nice to meet you." I thought that that was such a nice gesture. That
Yeah.
is, for me, when I read that again, that was Geoff Johns metaphorically saying thank you to Ron Mars for giving me a character like Kyle
Yeah.
Rayner, because Kyle Rayner had carried the
Yeah.
Green Lantern title for the last almost decade, or maybe even, yeah, a whole decade, from like
Yeah. Yeah.
1993 to 2004. Yeah, so pretty much a
2004.
little over
Yeah.
a decade.
Yeah.
And he had done such a great job, and at the same time he also did a great job building a story for Geoff to take over and really be able to culminate everything in this one story. And it's just a beautiful thing to see when good triumphs over evil, all the trials and tribulations that Hal had dealt with, the torturous things that he had to go through, his sacrifices, his time as the Spectre, his time as Parallax, the fact that he returns, he's Green Lantern again, and now it's time to
Mhm.
rebuild.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I mean, look, we've talked a lot about Kyle in the lead up to this too. I mean, I read a lot more of the, Ron Mars run than we talked about on the channel too. Um, and that moment is good. Not just, I think you're exactly right about like a thank you to Ron Mars, but it's also good in that for people who have grown to really like Kyle, it's it's a real kind of if not passing the torch, like kind of a moment of introduction of equals of, I mean, that fight where they're all using their powers in very defined personal ways goes to show you Hal is not Kyle, Kyle is not Hal, none of them are. They're all different from each other. but they've all got their place. And there can be great stories told about all these characters who really are different from each other, even if they all wear the color green. Like that's really it. That's the similarity there, right? Um, and I found it respectful to the idea that we're not just going to throw out this character that has grown to be so meaningful to a lot of people. I mean, like we talked
Yeah.
about the power of Ion on this channel, right? It's a great story. Um, and yeah, I mean it's nice to see that as Hal comes back, it isn't throwing everything out that came before. It's the opposite of that. It's a respect of
No,
everything
you're
that led up
absolutely
to it.
right. I mean, like I said earlier, I mean, we literally had Kyle Rayner as the Green Lantern for a decade. This is the first
Yeah.
time that some comic readers are actually reading Hal Jordan as Green Lantern for the first time. This is also the first time that they're actually seeing possibly Guy Gardner donning the Green
Yeah.
Lantern gear or John Stewart donning the Green Lantern gear. And one of the few things that I will say, I mean, I know this is a bit of foreshadowing. If there's one thing that I do appreciate about Geoff Johns is the fact that in this road to Blackest Night, he's going to make sure that the rest of the Green Lanterns are going to get their time in the sun, because one of the
Mhm.
things that we haven't mentioned, and I don't even think we've even mentioned this name in this Ultimate Journey just yet, but eventually, very, very soon in our Ultimate Journey, we're also going to be introduced to Peter Tomasi's Green Lantern Core Run,
Mhm.
which is going to feature which is going to be the sister series to the main Green Lantern run. So you're going to have two brilliant men working on these this whole story, because there's going to be so many characters that are going to have a role to play right now. I mean, there have been a lot of characters. I mean, look, there were so many characters in Crisis. There were so many
Yeah.
characters in a lot of the other stories that we talked about. But in light of Green Lantern in particular, we're going to see a lot of different faces and names that we're going to be focusing on as we go through this. And I'm just going to say something completely off topic. It's nice to know that right now in the world of comics, Geoff Johns and Peter Tomasi are together again in the Ghost
Yeah.
Machine universe doing amazing things, and it
Yeah.
shows. But reading those books makes me want to come back to their Green Lantern
Yes.
stuff, because their Green Lantern stuff really showed us how that creative relationship was cemented and why it really is an amazing combination of minds and storytelling. And this is just the beginning of it.
Hmm.
So we get our first story arc of the Green Lantern run that is written by Geoff Johns, and this is the first time that you're reading it. So I personally want to know now, how do you feel about it being important to the story? Did you find it to be very important? Did you understand why I asked you to read this first story arc called No Fear?
My thoughts on No Fear. Completely understand why we read this one. I will say it works. Look, Rebirth was an amazing, amazing story that it would be insane to expect the first six issues of a flagship Green Lantern title to recapture or match in any way. So it doesn't. I like Rebirth better. So what? It's really important, and this is the beginning of another long journey, this lengthy maxi series run of Green Lantern, right? And like I understand completely why we read it, because it might not trade in absolutely everything we read like Rebirth does, but it certainly continues to show Geoff Johns flexing the history of the Green Lantern. It obviously has more Black Hand, which which
Talk about that.
will be important as well. So obviously we've got to do that. Um, I actually what I really loved about it was um, the history of how the person that we get
Yes.
in these stories. And I think that that is incredibly, incredibly important to appreciating and finding value in everything we're going to read now, because it's like, okay, so Hal is back and we know Hal, and there's all these stories that we have had with him. But a lot of that has been tainted by parallax, right? And so who is Hal Jordan? And so we get these flashbacks. We get these moments of him as a child. We get these interactions with his brother. We get these, scenes with both his dad and with the sergeant, and just you learn more about what makes Hal tick as opposed to Green Lantern, as opposed to the Green Lantern we knew who was tainted by parallax. And that, I think, ends up being the most important part of these issues, despite the reintroduction of Black Hand, despite the continued prevalence of other members of the cast who are going to continue to be relevant as we go forward, despite various interactions with the Guardians and the other Lanterns and all of that. And all of that is, of course, super important. But like the heart of what this actually was about is reintroducing us to Hal, but also basically as a new character in many ways, because he is Hal Jordan. That's true. This is a return of the character. But did we ever really know Hal post Crisis on Infinite Earths? Like it begs the question, and now we do.
And one of the things that I want to talk about that I think will explain this a little bit further is what the story arc No Fear does is Geoff Johns has shown us the past. Now he's going to tell his own story.
Yeah.
So we're going to really be seeing a lot less referential material and a lot more foreshadowing to the road to Blackest Night. So the best way to start his story is, like you said, let's have Hal, not necessarily Green Lantern, but let's let Hal reinvent himself and reestablish himself on Earth. Because when he comes back, what is the first thing that he wants to do? He wants to get a job.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing he knows how to do is he knows how to fly. So he wants to go back to Ferris Air to see if they'll take him back. One of the things that I really do like is the first bit of foreshadowing is the conversation that he has with John Stewart at the very beginning of the story, where they're schmoozing about how the Corps is starting back up. And the fact that they talk about how there's a lot of new recruits, and I think this was even referenced in Rebirth via Kilowog, how when the rings all got activated again, they all found their masters that were still alive, but most of the core is new recruits, and John seems to be excited about getting back into the groove of things as a Green Lantern, and Hal isn't really thinking about it, but he knows it's something he has to do. But one of the few things that is definitely hearkened upon is a referential, and that's the fact that Coast City is still being rebuilt after its ultimate destruction, and how Hal is a little bit upset, not furious or angry or anything, but just upset about the fact that nobody wants to live there because of what happened. And as a matter of fact, you mentioned Hal's brother. He
Mm-hmm.
doesn't even want to move back. And apparently, Coast City has a nickname called Ghost City because it is still very much an empty place because of what had happened some of those years before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, and I mean this is all this is all to say, the human part of what we're learning about Hal is so important here. And I think you're right about picking into Coast City as like a character in its own right and what that means. And I see a lot of a parallel in how people react to and treat Coast City and the attempts to revive it as I do the way the Justice League, but the broader DC universe, the heroes think of Hal. There's a level of distrust. There's a level of something needs to be built. There's too much history here. How can we go back to this? How can we have the courage to trust again, right? Um, and I see a lot of beautiful parallel in that, and that's why Hal is so I'm here, I'm back, I'm in it. Why isn't everybody here with me? And it's like, well, because something really happened and healing really needs to take place, and people are not that quick to completely forget when something horrible happened. And of course we see that in flashbacks of Hal's life. the way that that parallels what's going on there. But I think it's more than just Coast City's important to Hal, so let's bring it in, and that's where he lives. I think there's really something to be said about how the world thinks of Hal in the news reports about Ghost City, right? And the
Yeah.
way his brother is like, I don't know if I'm going back there, though, like
And
it's
we
great to
also,
hear you. Like,
and then we have the whole story with General Stone. General Stone is someone that actually is also from Hal's past, but through most of this story, General Stone actually encounters him as Green Lantern,
yeah.
and he actually calls on Green Lantern for them for assistance if they ever need it, because he always seems to be close by. And we also have a couple of other interesting things that do happen. We're introduced to a female pilot named who goes by the alias of Cowgirl. Remember her. She's going to play a significant role. And what I also really like about this specific character is I kind of like the fact that there's no like sexual tension between
Hmm.
the two of them. Like Hal doesn't really want to hit on her. He's
Hmm.
actually very admirable about her skills as a pilot, and that she's also a very fearless risk taker, which is something that Hal is known for. So it's like, do I have competition here?
Hmm.
And is there anything that I can teach her? Because she seems to know who he is. She seems to remember his name from history. So it's also not just bringing in the new recruits on the Green Lantern side, it's also about bringing in the new recruits in the real world on Hal's side, which I think is also a very interesting parallel.
No, it's very true. And I like what you called out there about the relationship that they have, being one of admiration and respect, which I think will be it's refreshing in comics at the time, but it's also one that'll continue to matter. So you're right to spotlight that.
And one of the other things that I do feel that that Geoff Johns likes to do is he wants to have a little bit of fun with his first arc by bringing in an old villain like Hector Hammond. And
Hmm.
the first big encounter in the new Green Lantern run is a state of the art manhunter trying to
Yeah.
take down a defective manhunter, which
Hmm.
seems to be defective in a very unusual way.
No, I mean it's more of that toying with the past that's going to be key all through Blackest Night itself. That's what this story is about, is reckoning with the past. And it's fun. And I mean, like we could talk about how Hammond is used, the way the character is written. We could talk about how fun the Manhunter stuff is, and yet how meaningful the end of that fight or that moment, whatever you want to call it, is. But I think it's all rolls up in service of these are weekly baddies in service of something broader, which is now going to remind me the joke that I should have started with when you said, "What did you think of No Fear? What are your thoughts upon reading it?" I should have said, "My first thought is it would probably be helpful if I had known German." That would so that's as we turn to that part of the of the story.
Yeah, that is also true. I mean, like, I don't know about you, but like, I think probably the most unimportant thing is the encounter with King Shark in issue 5. Like,
Yeah.
I'm still trying to understand what. I'm pretty sure that to me that was just filler, just like for a fun series of action sequences in the issue.
Yeah, I mean, largely I think so. I think that there is something to be said for, oh, another example of hyper sped up evolution that is like relevant, and we've got a few examples of this. This is like its own mini story arc thing that's part of it. Um, but that introduction in particular feels very much to me like we needed slightly more of a self-contained two-issue story, because at the end of the day, this is going on newsstands, right? So like I I think that's fine to acknowledge because that's the nature of everything that we've read before this have been like very tight stories, like individual works to be read as standalone. this is the Green Lantern ongoing, right? So it's gonna have some stories that are baddie of the week. And even I mean, I am impressed by how much baddie of the week matters and has connections to everything else. And I think that's a strength of what this is that we're doing. But like, it's fine to acknowledge that it is kind of a standalone Green Lantern conflict. It just
But
with some window dressing of bringing us back to where we started.
yes, because of course, out of nowhere, towards the end of the arc, the Black Hand shows up
Yeah.
with a whole new hand. And this is where I mean the foreshadowing really takes place because when the Black Hand returns, he's definitely not the weakling he seemed to be in Green Lantern Rebirth. And all he can think about is death. And he talks at the very end, he throws out a major line, which I can't remember word for word, but it's basically he says, "Death is the strongest color on my side of the spectrum." And I
Yeah.
know what that
Yeah.
means, but
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you're reading Green Lantern for the first time, it's like, what did he mean by that? And that
So
is
okay. Yeah.
that is what I mean by now Geoff Johns is sending us into the future with his story because oh boy, is that going to open up a big can of worms.
Yeah, no, that's a fun moment, and that's even if you're not like aware of the full, this pun is not intended, the full spectrum of like what comes from that, like it does, it's just such a cool thing in the moment that I think it lingers with readers, and I think that'll stick with people who don't know what's coming, and they will recall it as what's coming occurs.
Yep.
One of my favorite moments of No Fear, and a big part of the reason why we're reading. I mean, we'll read all of this stuff, but like it's a big part of the reason why it's worth taking the time to sit down and talk about No Fear specifically.
Yeah, and apparently, also I will say one of the few things that I do appreciate about Geoff Johns is that he really did make Hector Hammond uber creepy. Like he was really,
Yeah,
really creepy.
yeah.
And the fact that at the very end of the first story arc, it actually ends with him, and it's like he's excited because he knows something is going to happen.
Hmm.
And that's pretty much where we leave off with this part of the Ultimate Journey Road to Blackest Night. But I'm just saying to everybody right now, we are now very much in the thick of it, and we're going to be going a mile a minute with the stories that we're going to be reading. They're going to be in your face, fast paced, action packed, but they're all going to continue to drop little foreshadowing moments of what Blackest Night is all about. And one of the few things that I did also say to Andy is based on these two stories alone, particularly the moments with the Black Hand, that's why we read Identity Crisis. That was the significance of
Yeah.
that specific part of this ultimate journey. But I'm really looking forward to working with you again and moving forward on this story because, look, it's been a while since we've done this.
Mhm.
I'm glad to have seen your enthusiasm, Andy, after this long hiatus that we had. And I'm just really excited to move forward with you on this. But before we go, we do
Oh
want
yeah.
to let everybody know that the Green Lantern Geoff Johns run and the Green Lantern Corps run by Peter Tomasi are very, very intricate and very significant to the road to Blackest Night. I personally would recommend the entirety of both runs for everybody. We're not going to go through every single issue, but Andy, I'm just going to let you know that for your personal journey, you should definitely read the entire run because you're going to understand what I mean. Because one of the few parts of this story is one of my favorite stories of all time, and that's Sinestro Corps War. And I just
Mhm.
want you to see the journey from point A to point B. And once again, the genius of the little foreshadowing inklings that Geoff Johns drops all throughout his Green Lantern run until we get there. It's pretty cool.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, trust me, I'll be reading it, so don't worry.
All right.
Don't worry
And of
about
course, you know, I
that.
want to
Yeah.
talk about it with you, of course.
Yeah.
So yeah, everybody, thank you very much for watching another great episode of Ultimate Journey. Please leave a comment in the box below and let us know if you've. I'm really hoping someone out there read this. I mean, I know a lot of people have, but we love to talk to people about this stuff. We love to talk about the stuff with each other. I mean, I love going to the comic book store and just chatting with people in the store about it because pretty much everybody I know who goes into my store has read it and loved it. But
Mhm.
looking forward to another episode of Ultimate Journey with you, Andy. We will be going back to the Marvel Universe. We can't
Yeah.
forget about our Road to Secret Wars 2015. And next chapter of that run is a pretty significant one as well. It's going to officially conclude our time in the original Ultimate Universe created by Brian Michael Bendis. And then we're going to get into a very, very cool part of that Ultimate Journey as well. So thank you very much for everybody. Please like and subscribe, hit that notification bell so you're up to date with all of our latest content, and we will see you in the next one.